You're listening to the Jordan Lee Podcast. In this episode, I sit down with my wife, Laura Walker Lee. She has a background in film finance, venture capital, and we discuss 15 plus years of my background related to design, brand, business, creative direction, and kind of where things are and where things are headed with a broad overview about my background. And we kind of dive into some details around some things. So thanks for tuning in and hope you enjoy.
Well, my name is Laura Walker Lee, and you are Jordan Lee, and we're married, and we sometimes work together. And I am encouraging you to do this podcast because I think not enough people have been able to hear you explain your process and what you do for people. And I've seen it so many times and the results you get. And I think that more people should hear about it. Can I say a little bit about me and maybe then a little bit about you before you dive in?
Yeah.
Okay. I work in finance and private equity, venture capital, and I work a lot with like financial modeling and, just helping investors decide what to invest in, helping founders tell their story. And I would say a year or two into starting my company, this newer company, Madre Ventures, I brought you into this process with founders and decision makers and CEOs and investors. And you went from consulting pretty big companies like Fortune 500 companies to working directly with leadership. And I've just seen so many people be blown away by your branding, storytelling efforts, and then all of the digital design that you do on the other side of figuring out what someone's brand should be. And so I think you should democratize the process by opening up maybe some of your playbook and talking about your philosophies because, storytelling is really important for small and big companies, for artists, for anyone who's got a goal and wants to, exist out there in the world. So,
Do you want to say like how you got to venture? Because,
okay.
There's like 15 years that
More,
led up to that.
Yeah. So I have been working, my background is in entertainment finance. I've worked in different parts of Hollywood. I've worked in production, being an assistant director. I've been an executive at a studio at Universal Focus Features. I've been an agent at Creative Artists Agency, which is the biggest talent agency in the world. When I was there, I was a film finance agent, so I was advising investors and high net worth individuals, running financial models for them on creative packages. So like a script would come to me and I would attach different elements like an actor and a director, and the value of those projects would fluctuate up and down depending on how we put the movie together. And I'd have to put together what's called a capital stack and show them how we're going to mitigate risk and what kind of check they would have to write. And then we would do a closing and the movie would go off and get made. And then it would come back to me and I would take the finished product and I would sell it to a studio, which was always the exit strategy. So I did that many times a year. I worked on about 80 movies a year from like 2008 until 2014. And I worked on Academy Award winning movies. I worked on terrible movies. It's art, so you never really know how it's going to turn out. But I represented investors, but I also represented celebrities like Reese Witherspoon, Jennifer Lopez, Meryl Streep, Julia Roberts, Anne Hathaway, mainly actresses. I've worked with just a myriad of people over the last 15, 20 years. And then in 2014, I started a family office with a Latin American investor. And I went from the selling side at the agency to the buying side. And I started to buy projects. So instead of working on 80 movies a year, I was working on about 5. And it was great. And I was in bidding wars all the time. Jordan would see me in bidding wars every couple of weeks against studios, against Netflix, against Hulu. There was kind of a bubble forming in the entertainment industry in the mid 2010s, and that's when I decided to get into impact investing as well. So I was working on film and TV projects on one side, but then also impact investing deals like clean energy deals, mindful technology deals, and just helping founders tell their story, and also like vet investments to take to all the investors I'd been working with in the 10 years leading up to that transition. And so all of that venture capital and private equity activity is housed under Madre Ventures. And I had a problem I was trying to solve for myself, which was it takes an immense amount of effort to raise capital for people. And I really wanted to shorten the raise window for myself with founders. And I remember there was this one founder who had a company that Peter Thiel had invested in. Really amazing company. They're solving for like Alzheimer's and dementia, which is bankrupting the Medicare system, and so many boomers are ending up in, terrible care because of this. And I decided I wanted to help this founder, and I introduced him to Jordan because I really thought that he wasn't telling his story very well. And he could tell it better. And if he told it better, it would be easier for me to go out to investors and help him raise. So Jordan, he did a bunch of exercises with this founder. He redid his deck. He retold his story. And we went out with that deck and that story and that coaching, and we were able to oversubscribe his $10 million round in less than 10 days. It's an amazing company itself, and I'm really, fortunate to have been involved with it. But I do think that was the easiest raise I had ever experienced. And I thought, Jordan, maybe we have something here to help people explain what they're trying to achieve. And Jordan really has like a few amazing systems that he has learned over the years, developed over the years, and I think it's worth delving into. So
Yeah. Good intro.
So that's me, and I think you should talk about yourself.
Yeah.
Brag about yourself.
Can I give a funny story about your work, though?
Sure.
I remember one time you were like transitioning from the film stuff to the venture, and like I don't remember where we were. We were in a restaurant or something. We were traveling, and it was like the day of the Academy Awards. Remember?
No.
We went into this place, and it was like on the television. We're like, oh, it's the Oscars or whatever. And we sat there and kind of watched while we ate, and you weren't in that world, but like all of the movies that were like being nominated and all of the people was like, I want to say like 5 out of the 6 that won were things that you worked on.
Yeah.
And like all the stuff was nominated. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
you did that. And it was like, it takes 3, 5, 10 years for that stuff to happen, right? So
That's
you don't
right.
even see it's like you're tilling the garden and planting the seeds for stuff that like takes a decade to grow.
Yeah.
And then, business life, the industry happens, and you see the writing on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone thought you were crazy. And now they're calling you for, career advice, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was probably one of the last like Oscars that I paid attention to personally.
Mm-hmm.
But I just remember like you worked on a lot of stuff. I mean, when we met, you were reading like what? You've read over 2,000 scripts
Oh,
in film.
probably more. I remember when we first started dating, you had that place in Burbank, and I brought my laptop to your place, and I showed you the raw footage from Dallas Buyers Club that we had just gotten from set. And Matthew McConaughey, was in that movie with
Jared Leto.
Jared Leto.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was showing you the raw footage, and I was like, he's going to win an Academy Award for this.
Right.
Like, I just knew it, and he did.
Yeah.
And Jared Leto won too, but like, it's fun to be involved, you know?
I mean, I think, people that know you and me just seeing like your track record in taste speaks for itself in the sense of like you know what's gonna be a hit with a wider audience, and like not just the stuff that you worked on that was successful, but even the things that you've worked on that deals that happen or don't happen, right? Like there's a lot of things out there where you just have a good sense of like where culture, society is moving, and like what people are looking for, and like what's gonna hit with people, even if it's 3 to 5 years out. Like I've always been impressed with that. Like you have a good temperature on, writers, directors, talent. You can see it and call it, and you're usually right. And it's not just you being a spectator, like an armchair quarterback. Like you actually work with these people. You know what I mean? There's a difference where you're kind of involved and you're in the mix.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I feel like I work with some of those people less so now because I've taken a sidestep into venture capital, but I've done it because, I think people's relationship to long form narrative has been changing. And I saw that in like 2018, 2019, which is why I started Madre. I like soft launched it in 2020. And now it's just, running on its own. But I think that we are a narrative driven species. And I think that like my curiosity about narrative, like, I went back to school a couple years ago. I studied narrative economics at Yale under Robert Shiller, who won the Nobel Prize for narrative economics in 2013. And it's basically the relationship between story and macroeconomic trends and microeconomic trends. Like the American dream of buying a house is a narrative economic concept, and Bitcoin is a narrative economic concept. And like there's all these economic concepts that kind of roll around in our heads, and they amount to emotional decisions that we make with our money, and it shifts markets and it makes companies prosper or not. And I think that there is a narrative economic story to be told about what you're doing with people in leadership that really moves the needle to money in the bank, like literally money in the bank.
Yeah.
And I think that the internet is fractionalized and it is really spread out. And ultimately, the people telling the best stories are those who are pulling ahead in the race for the attention economy and then therefore their business.
Right. Well, I think from a narrative perspective, I think I've learned a lot from you as far as like the importance of that related to culture. And so you look at it from a, entertainment, money flow, investment, business side of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my background is design,
Mm-hmm.
but leading into design, brand and design is about storytelling. But it's not linear storytelling, right? So the thing that's interesting is like a movie is linear, like the script is linear. You sit for 2 hours, it's linear. The internet is non-linear. There's a non-linear story to be told, right?
Right.
And so, my background, people ask me what I do. I work in digital design. And like on the surface, it's, you create something aesthetic, or you create a platform, or you design UX or UI. There's the practice of the design, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the thinking side of design, the design thinking side. So when, Forbes or Fast Company come out with articles and it's like, these top companies leading design, or the McKinsey Design Index, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, successful companies lead through design. Apple, Samsung, Sony, Disney, Airbnb, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think a lot of people look at that and think, oh, it's the veneer. It's the finishing touch on the thing, right? We can go back to Steve Jobs and Apple when he came out with the iPod. Everything was beautiful and white and clean, and there was like this really minimalist approach to all of it, right?
Right.
So a lot of people's perception of design is that it's this finished veneer, on top of something. It's the end of the conveyor belt in the corporate world, right?
They think that.
They think that. And so
But good design.
They think that, but these companies that place design that are integrated more into the business side, those are the ones that everyone looks at as an example, and they try to copy the veneer. They try to copy the UX. They try to copy, some business model, et cetera, right?
Right.
But design being integrated in the business is a few things. One, it understands the business. It understands the metrics of the business. It understands the goals of the business. The 1 year, the 3 year, the 5 year, the long-term vision. It also understands the customers a lot, right? And there are things around design that are not just the aesthetic side of it. I would say, a good 12, 15 years of my work is looking at the aesthetic pieces. But the thing that has allowed me to do the work that I've done for a long time is integrating myself into the business, integrating myself in understanding the development, integrating myself to understand the UX, right? What makes all these pieces tick? And at an early age, it was like, that was just who I am. I'm just curious about how does all of it work, right? So as my career kind of moves forward, I can sit in rooms and have the conversations around the business and how we're going to actually develop and build it and write the code, but also how we're going to design and make it look and function, right? And that was the thing I think that set me apart. I didn't understand it. It was just that's how I operate, right? Fast forward, 10 years into my career of doing this work with ESPN, Disney, Apple, REI Co-op, a lot of startups, entrepreneurs, musicians, record labels from all facets of types of design, right? Like whether it's digital or it's doing a photography shoot or, going on movie set and shooting photography, like it's all creative. It's all, expressions of a brand.
Yeah. You've done all those jobs, but you are also really steeped in design thinking, which is like, now you're like the architect of those things.
Sure. So I was going to fast forward to like, doing that for like 10 years. And then really learning about design thinking and what that actually means, right? So I studied it at Harvard. I studied it at Cornell.
Yeah.
And what it did is it showed me from a systems and engineering mindset, how do we look at design and how do we organize that, right? And how do we categorize and then bucket it and then sort out our thoughts, right? And so I've always been this guy that's like, creativity isn't us just sitting around and wait for the magic to happen, like wait for it to strike. Yeah, you'll get a bunch of good ideas, but there are large categories that we can put a bunch of ideas in, and then we can innovate on that, or we can think outside the box.
Right.
And so design thinking is really the process of how we think and apply those things. And so I've taken that to the act of doing the design practice, but I've also taken it to the brand and the storytelling and the business and the customer. And it builds models that are pretty successful, very successful, right? Like it's all metric based. And so you would look at it on the veneer and you'd be like, wow, that's a really beautiful brand. That photography, that logo, like the website is amazing. But like at the foundation of it, it meets and checks a lot of boxes. And so we go through these processes to organize all of that, right? And, a lot of people, they'll look at like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or Google, and those guys are innovative. One, they've got the capital and the fuel to kind of do that, right? And they have the vision. But, innovation is really about how do you think outside the box, but how do you do things with the things that are already inside the box? And how do you look at another box and borrow from that world of that box? And the box at corporate America is a whole lot bigger of a box than, some startup landscape company in your neighborhood.
Right.
They've got a different size box. So how do you differentiate, right? And then how do you start and build your brand and build your business and consider that before you make any sense of what the logo or the color, all of that, the brand style guide, like that is the last piece. That's the easy part.
Right.
And so when companies are looking at other companies and they're like, oh, they have design integrated at their executive level or their director level, right? Or their business level, or, it's not, hey, we want to take the guy who sits there and pushes pixels and makes things look pretty and let him have a seat at the table. It is, we need to have somebody who can think through systematically around the design of what we're doing inside the company, how we express ourselves to our customers, and how do we attract more people in our audience, right? And so now you open up the floodgates of like a whole lot of stuff to talk about. Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really great explanation of how you think. The way that when I'm explaining to people what you do, I usually say like he looks at what audiences matter for your financial goals and your growth, and he starts with that. And I feel like a big differentiator between you as a design and branding lead versus other designers is like you don't take your worldview and try to lay it over what a company or a CEO or a founder is.
Yeah, so
you start with like what their essence is. Like, can I tell a short story?
Yeah.
Like, I introduced you to a business owner this week, right? Who was like very frustrated with he had been working with a designer for a month, and all he wanted was a logo, and then a website. He was going to upscale to the website. Anyway, I put him on the phone with you, and he was just totally blown away in the first meeting based on how you were describing your process, because you make it all about them and you make it all about the company and you don't make it at all about yourself. And I feel like there are a lot of designers who they make it about themselves and their brand and they're edgy or they're whatever. And it gets in the way of actual progress when it comes to working with clients.
Yeah, I this might be, a designer might listen to this and it might rub people wrong ways or whatever, but like the old guard of design was very much rooted in the idea of like a failed artist, right? And I've worked with a lot of like Gen Xers and older designers who they're very protective of their work, right? And they're very like sensitive about it. Because it's a very precious thing to them, and that's like an artist's approach to the design. Whereas, you know, we could look at 20 different shades of green, just pick the one that is accessible for colorblind people and go with that,
right?
Or lean into your brand color a little bit and, you know, make some adjustments. So what I'm trying to say is like, I've always approached, like I have like my creative stuff that I work on that is like aesthetically what I like to do and feel. But when I work with clients, it's really about I'm playing the role of best supporting actor,
right?
Or holding up a mirror,
right?
And reflecting back to them. It's like they know what makes them feel a certain way, but they don't have the language to articulate it. So my process is really like, how do I help you articulate the things, and how do we create buckets of ideas and thoughts and conversations? From a design thinking perspective, we will organize that. So at the brand level, you know, the attributes of your brand is related to your culture of your company, the culture that you want to present to the world, the impact that you want to have on the world, the X factor, the differentiators, right? And a lot of other things that we could go down and start to bucket that stuff. Then on the other side of it, you look at the customers. Who are your current customers, or who are the people that you want to work with you? Who are they as people, and how does your brand fit into their life? And I think the biggest thing that people could take away from this, stop making your brand about yourself. Start making the brand about how you can infuse yourself into somebody's lifestyle, right? So, you know, an NFL or an NBA athlete, right? Okay. So they drive really expensive cars. They wear really nice clothes, right? They want to eat out at really great restaurants. They want people and business people in their life who match the personas of Louis Vuitton, Mercedes, right? Michelin star restaurants. That is a different audience than somebody who goes to the Harley Davidson shop to buy a motorcycle.
Right.
Totally different audience. So you can't be something that you're not. You can't read Forbes or Fast Company for like the brands that are killing it because they put design first and then copy their designs. Like I remember, you know, when Apple was huge in the early 2000s, like you look at all the startups and tech companies that were just ripping off the Apple aesthetic.
Right.
Clean white, mirrored stuff, but they're missing the mark, right? You have to go a level deeper. You have to build the foundation and then express from what the foundation is.
Right. Like so the NFL and NBA players who you've worked with people of that level, versus like the Harley Davidson guy, they might be spending the same amount of money, but what motivates them to spend that money is very different. How they identify with the product is totally different. So it's your job to figure out what is going to satiate that desire, or like, you know, form that connection with the end audience so that the business is successful.
Yeah, I think working with all different types of companies, I can see with owners and leaders, when we work through these processes, I see the aha moment go off for them,
Right.
where it's like, oh, it's not about me. It's not about what I like. It's how does my business fit into the lives of other people? As a business leader, your business is your life. Your work is your life, right? Your work, personally speaking, my work is my life. Your work is your life. Their businesses are their life.
Right.
But for people who either need their services or their product, it's not their life. And the idea of let's build the monolith and hope that they will show up and be as excited about our brand, that doesn't exist anymore. That's a boomer mentality, right?
Yeah.
In the 70s and 80s, let's build these towers and put our last name on the building.
Right.
And everyone's going to think that I'm important.
Boomers also say that 90% of success is just showing up. I think that was in a siloed society where only a few companies had the lion's share of people's attention through commercials and television, radio, things like that. And now with the internet, it's like you have to tell a really compelling story that's going to resonate directly with the people who are going to...
But you have to tell a different story. The story is told, it's the same story, it's told differently.
Right.
Because before the internet, all stories were linear, everything. And so a non-linear storytelling of a brand is touch points, right?
Yeah.
You have to understand that it's not about you and your hero journey of your as a business leader or as a brand. It's about what's the hero journey of your audience, okay?
Right.
So let's go back to like athletes, NFL, NBA players.
Yeah.
Right? Hero journey for them is they come out of, an area or a school, they go to college, they get a great break because they're amazing at playing this thing, right? And they work really hard, right? Their family supports them in what they're doing, and then they make it. And now it's like big time. They've got all this money. That's a hero journey. So the other side of that is, how do they not lose all of that?
Right.
Right? So that's a different hero journey than the guy who goes to Harley Davidson and maybe he's 50, 55 years old and he's always loved motorcycles and he's getting that pension retirement payout and he's ready to, like, kids are out of the house. Like, that story is much different.
Right.
That story of freedom for the athlete is 20 years of hard work or maybe 15. And the other story is, 30, 40 years of hard work at one company, finally made it to retirement.
Right.
So the brand story that you tell, that the emotion is freedom for both, right? But the way it's told and the way it's expressed and the way it's shared to those people are very different. And so the messaging is one side of it. The copy, how you express that to the world is different. So when you go, I like to watch the Super Bowl because I like to watch the ads, right? And like watch how you can tell that story in 30 seconds.
Right.
That's one way to express it, right? There's other ways: colors, textures, typography, the experiences. There's ways to poorly express it too. You know what I mean? Like I hate when I buy something from a shop online and it's like, just maybe it's an Amazon store, it's something like around the house or the kitchen. Like, I don't care about it. And now all of a sudden I'm getting like an email every single day from this company that sold me something, right?
Right.
That's a bad experience. That's a bad touch point. That's a bad journey map for the customer.
Right.
So you have to have a level of self-awareness that where do you fit into your customers' lives, and then respect it.
Right.
Be able to step back and have some humility and like, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you're doing that journey map from the very beginning.
Yeah, and then you design to that, right?
Right. Then you design to that.
Right.
Something that I want to say, because I feel like you're not going to say it, is I have seen you work with business leaders that you take them through the process of, your design thinking process. And I feel like, you kind of, you administer this version of like narrative therapy with them where they're talking a lot, you're finding the gems and you're distilling it down to its most important parts. And I have seen more than one person cry in these sessions.
Yeah, I mean, there's been very wealthy, very famous people that I take them through this thing, and then it's the same reaction every time, right?
Yeah,
it's like
it's
6
amazing.
hours, and it's like,
yeah, we have pictures in our personal library
design
of
therapy.
Some well-known people who they kind of have that aha moment or they have that reveal, and it's really amazing to see because these people, they spend day in, day out thinking about this, but they don't have your tools or your language to maybe do the thing that they want to do first, but they just don't have the training to do it. And I think you bring people through that process in a really elegant way.
But I think it's built out of a pursuit of truth, right? So I want truth in the world. And I want other people to find and express truthfully who they are. And I think there's a big copycat syndrome in everything. Everything is a remix of a remix of a remix, right? Like Fight Club. And the pursuit of truth, I think, is really where I landed on this whole thing. Because, in my undergrad work was like PR communications, and I did design and studied theology and, minor with different things and studied art and all of that. I didn't like PR because I felt like it was creating a illusion, right? It just wasn't for me. So I liked the expression side of the tactics of it.
Right.
Then you get into working at corporate America, and you see behind the curtain of how things work, right? And, well, let's just throw a bunch of money at stuff and see what sticks. I've seen that over and over and over again. And so out of that, it was like, wow, if I can organize my thinking and thoughts and creativity to have impact for people, people can have the ability to organize their thoughts and their brand and their tactics to have as much impact as these companies who just have a massive slush fund to throw at bodies to try to like force their way into society and billboards and everything.
Brute force approach.
Right. And so my approach is very much surgical. Okay. I'll talk about the process a little bit. First is the brand. You want to understand your brand. And then it is the audience and it is the business. Across those three pieces, you look at applying design thinking. So at a very macro level, clarify what it is you're trying to do or solve, or what's the challenge or the problem, right? Then you ideate through that. How do we think through this and prototype? I mean, sketching on napkins is the most lo-fi form, right? You can sit there and prototype for 20 minutes on napkins. I mean, I've done mobile app design for Fortune 100 companies, like drawing and cutting out little pieces of paper. That was the iteration of it, right? It was like, this is the path.
Yeah.
Let's build this, right? So your ideation is you clarify the problem, and then you want to ideate around it. And there's ways to ideate that, right? My favorite one is the idea of alternate worlds, and I can get stuck in that for a long time. So like a really good example of that is we were talking about this like a couple weeks ago, but like take so as the boomer generation gets older, they're going to, and the rising cost of healthcare in this country is, skyrocketing. Like, why can't there be, so this is an alternate world taking of an Uber or Lyft type app where you can get home health care, right? You're borrowing from the alternate world and you're applying it to a new problem, right? So you're ideating, and I like the alternate world thing, right? I have a lot of fun with that in my brain. That's like my favorite one. But there's other things you can do, like a creative matrix chart. I mean, you can Google like design thinking stuff. I'm not going to go all the way down that, but
I think we should do like an episode, on clarify, ideate, and like, the whole process, and how maybe a couple of case studies. I mean, but what do people mostly come to you for between those three buckets? Would you say? You described the three different
the brand, the business, and the audience type stuff.
Yeah.
Well, people come to me for, I need a website, or I need a logo, or I need a brand, or I need some album art, or, let's collaborate on this, that, or whatever.
Right.
And that kind of starts the conversation, but then it's explaining, if we want to get there, if we want to reach that destination, like we have to kind of go through this process.
Right. To get the best result. Right.
Yes. Like to get the best result. And part of it is this design thinking stuff, right? Clarify, ideate, and then you move into develop and implement, right?
Yeah.
And you apply that across your brand, your business, and your audience. But that's kind of the first stop, right? And then the second place is, now we get into the creative process, right? And that's there's a lot there, right?
Well, and the deliverables are different for each client, right? So like you usually end up with like a brand guide that's like a very thick Bible, right? Of like the expression of their brand across all different channels that will reach the audiences that matter. But like in terms of deliverables, like sometimes you're delivering, talk about some of the different types of deliverables that you give to people who end up working with you.
Well, a lot of documentation, right? So brand strategy documentation. That's a roadmap for companies to say, okay, leadership, right? We document all the stuff that we cover. So what's your mission, your vision, your purpose, your customer, your brand, your brand personality, right? Your archetype, the pains, right? The things that we're solving for, the brand story. So all of that documentation is a deliverable. Right?
And that could be really useful for a CEO that has a people, 100 to 1,000 people working for them. But it could also be useful to like a sole proprietor who like, needs to hire a social media manager or needs to hire, like outsource, like they can just hand a brand guide to people who are executing on their behalf, and they don't have to have a conversation from scratch about what they stand for, what the brand colors are, what the typography is, and all that, because it's all explained, right?
Yeah. So like the brand strategy is a document to really scaffold up how you can scale outward and into the future. It's a roadmap. It's a creative roadmap. A lot of people would hear brand strategy. Well, like, what is that, right?
Right.
It's not like, here's your logo variations, and here's your color palette and all that. That's a style guide. That's not your brand. Your brand is having enough awareness about yourself and who your customers are, so you can go and communicate and express yourself to those customers, and you let them make their mind up about what your brand is, right? And so the only way to do that is you take your mission, your vision, your purpose, and your values, and then you filter it through a personality. You filter it through the archetype of who your company is as a collective that makes sense to those audience.
Right.
Right. And then from that, and I'll get to the deliverables, but like we're always trying to reach these end goals. So there's like, it could be print collateral, business cards, anything designed, right? Anything visual aesthetic, like we can do that. Web, mobile, shooting photography or film or all of that, right? But the idea is until you have that stuff sorted out, then you move into the creative side, right? And that process. And then from the creative, it's a very collaborative piece to reach the end result. And it's basically reflecting back along that journey
Right.
with the leadership.
Something that I think people get surprised by in your branding process and they're not going to experience with a lot of other people is like when I'm working with founders, for instance, like there's this one founder that I've done work with, and his valuation's at about $5 billion right now, and his exit strategy is to IPO in the next 2 years. The audience that matters for his financial goal is he's going to have to roadshow with investors, high net worth individuals, and then also just public sentiment in general is going to have to be up because he's going to have to manage shareholder optics and the public opinion. So leading up to the IPO, he's going to have to speak on stages. He's going to have earned media. It's not just, relegated to a logo and a website. He has to build presence. And so you working with someone like that, taking them through the branding process and giving him a very succinct way to explain why his business is so important will work its way into his speeches, his earned media. It's not just about the visuals, you're getting to the heart of what that business is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So this work has been 5 to 7 years of that.
Right.
And now I've built a digital platform that houses all of this data, right? So
right.
I have all of this, and what it does is, like you're saying, it's vocabulary, how somebody can speak, how the business and brand can represent themselves, like you said, on stage or to their audience, right? So, this isn't about, I work a lot with a lot of companies that people don't really know about, and a lot of my work isn't that type of design work that is put on products and services and billboards and media. I've done that, but a lot of the most impactful stuff I do is things that will never see the light of day, but it's helping people raise hundreds of millions of dollars, consistently.
Right.
So
I want to give another practical example, which is there's another company that I worked with who they were sourcing $800 million of non-dilutive funding from the EPA and government agencies. And your work with somebody like that would be the audience would be people in Washington, D.C., politicians, decision makers. That's not the same audience as founder number one that I described, CEO number one that I described. It's they're both aiming for the same type of, 8-9 figures, but the strategy to appeal to two totally different audiences has to be dialed in a way that is inspiring to those specific audiences for reasons that they care about.
Right. And that is different than a B2B audience and a B2C audience.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I cut my chops with a lot of B2C stuff. And I realized early on, my drive and ambition and aesthetic is really because I had to understand this holistic landscape of how everything works at a certain company or a project, right?
Right.
And then I learned design thinking helps me to organize these thoughts.
Yeah.
And then how do I create design thinking for other people to document that so they can go at scale and create brands that are just as impactful as all the Fortune 100 brands, right?
Right.
So I've seen it done. I've worked inside of it for a long time. And then I've developed models that are faster than the Fortune 100 approach, which is let's just throw a lot of money and a lot of bodies at a project, and we'll kind of get halfway there. You know, it's bureaucratic, you know, designed by committee, right?
Right.
Whereas I'm taking those things and those thinkings and that level of approach of and taking a surgical strike for people, and then so from that, right, we look at the personality of the brand,
Right.
and then we step into the creative.
I think that in future episodes we should, like, you know, maybe silo it out.
Yeah, I'm just
'cause
doing
there's-
broad strokes. I mean,
Yeah, no, I know.
I mean, we could take.
We've covered a lot of ground, and I think that it would be really worth it to go through, like, you know, the different areas. But something that, you know, you're so good at making your work about everybody else, and you don't talk about yourself very often.
Yeah.
I think it would be fun for people to hear about, like, your origin story with design and how you kind of came to it. And I mean, you kind of described the back half of it in terms of, you know, your studies at Harvard and Cornell and stuff like that. But I want you to go back to, like, your music days and, like, what you did there and, like,
To my childhood.
and, you know, I think it'd be fun for people to hear how you kind of got into design and why you love it, and bring it to today.
I was thinking about this, like, today or yesterday, and, like, as a kid, I think the idea of building experiences and making other people experience something that I experienced. There's a story. When I was a kid, we went to Disneyland and went on the Haunted Mansion ride.
Yeah.
And I was terrified. I mean, I cried the entire way through. Did not look. My brother loved it, right? My mom and dad. And it was like that experience for me was not a good experience.
Right.
You know, because it was too real, but I was not the audience for that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But then, you know, you go right next door to Pirates of the Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
And I fell in love with it,
Wow.
you know, as a kid. And, like, I think my mom took me on it like 6 times in a row on that boat ride. Because it was
Wow.
like I found an experience that, like,
I've never heard this story.
Yeah, I loved. And it was just the whole, I mean, when I was a kid, like the Goonies and Indiana Jones and, you know, all of that, right?
Yeah.
But, like, the Pirates of the Caribbean ride felt like that. It was real to me, right? And it was just enough that I could handle it, but it was, like, really for me. So I remember as a kid, after we went to Disneyland, I'd go over to my grandparents' house, and they had that huge back deck. And, like, I remember going underneath there and, like, digging out holes and burying treasure and hanging things under the deck and, like, little skeletons and stuff, like, to recreate that, right? To, like, try to give all my cousins the same experience that I felt, right?
so fun.
It was like, as a kid, it was like I was very aware of, like, if I experience something, how can I help other people experience that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, moving into, like, my youth, like, I got into, like, rock and roll and skateboarding, right? Played in a lot of bands and, you know, very DIY, like putting shows together, playing guitar,
Yeah.
doing vocals on all of that, right? And that was a good time. Recorded albums, like, it was a lot of fun. And then, you know, went to college and played in a lot of bands there, recorded albums. We were very serious about all of that. But I was friends with a lot of, like, bands that were on record labels. Like, all of our friends were on huge labels, like bands that people would know and have heard on the radio. And they're still playing and selling out tours now, right? Like, friends of friends of friends. We're kind of in that world. And so I was doing design and album art for our stuff, and then I started doing it for all these other bands, you know. And I would do it, and they would go on tour. They'd come back to town, and I'd see them and be like, "Dude, your stuff is, like, our best selling merch." I was like, "Oh, that's cool." I really loved it, right? And you know, that was, like, early 2000s.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I think Facebook wasn't even around yet.
Yeah.
It was still MySpace.
Yeah.
And so I was doing like MySpace design and development for bands and all. Anyways, that's where it kind of came from. And then from there, I finished school and had a pretty good sized portfolio and landed a job up in the Seattle area at an agency and worked on a lot of stuff for like big healthcare companies, hospitals, ESPN, right? Did a lot of stuff with ESPN. And then I wound up doing well, won an Emmy Award. You know, when I was like, I don't know.
For which project?
Oh, so it was the award was, it was 100 years of Chicago Cubs never winning a World Series and talking about their curse. It was a documentary of somebody from the 1910s, the 1920s, the 1930s, the 40s, 50s, right? And so like it had Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I mean, I played in like shoegaze bands, you know, in college, like My Bloody Valentine and Corgan and Hum and all those. Love that stuff. So that was kind of cool to like work on that project. So I was like, oh man, I love this.
Yeah.
And designed like this designed the scoreboard of Wrigley Stadium as an interactive clickable thing. And you click on the parts of the scoreboard to watch these documentary videos, right? Like it had never, this streaming was not around, right? Netflix was still mailing CDs to people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it was a very ambitious design and approach. And yeah, I remember going to New York and sitting there, sitting next to like an HBO exec when I'm like 22 years old, and it won, and like, you know, saw Bob Costas in the restroom, and Kelly Ripa was sitting in front of me. He's like, you know, Muhammad Ali, and here I am just like kind of don't know what to do with myself. And like, it won. Yeah. And so that was kind of cool. Yeah. It was like, oh, okay, maybe I should do this for a bit. And then Disney, like, I was watching a documentary about Walt Disney on the TV, and this was like 2010. Yeah. And I got an email from somebody at Disney with an @Disney email address. Wow. While I was watching this documentary. I thought it was a joke. And next things leads to another, and like I'm flying down to Burbank to do an interview and talk with people and whatnot. And basically, like I was working on some projects where we were developing a news site in Chattanooga, right? I was in Seattle, but it was doing this stuff in Chattanooga. Came up with this idea of kind of like full screen cards across the screen. And then the code would scale and shift. So if you're on mobile, it would be completely filled and vertical, but as you scale the browser, that's responsive design. But we didn't know it as that. We just took, I think it was Bootstrap or something, and rewrote all of the code to build this thing that called in, you know, like the widths, basically based on CSS and JavaScript. And then like a couple years later, like CNN was doing the same design thing, right? So it was like Disney brought me down there and found out that I was doing all of this stuff. And I went to Disney on the Parks and Resort stuff and kind of led that process of a platform they were already doing, but worked on kind of the mobile responsive tablet refactoring things. And then I was in like a very small group, and we basically redid all of that. So at that point, you know, I was working across 7 different Disney brands doing things.
Which ones? Like
Disney World, Land, Cruise, Alani, Disney Parks.
Alani is the hotels?
In Hawaii. Okay. And then I did Disneyland Paris, and did I say cruise line already?
I think so.
Cruise. There was like one other thing. So it would be like these special one-off projects. Yeah. Or these like free to create type stuff. Yeah. Or just production work, like keeping the lights on. Right. So I was working like 80, 90 hours a week at Disney.
And you won a lot of awards while you're at Disney.
Yeah. Like A lot.
Like
A lot. I don't even...
like how many?
10 at least,
Yeah.
you know, for different things.
Yeah.
Stuff got nominated.
Yeah.
Won. Yeah. So I did that, and then went up to REI back in Seattle.
Yeah.
Because I grew up there. Climbed mountains, summited Rainier 3 times.
Yeah, that was a dream for you.
Yeah. Climbed St. Helens, you know, hunt, fish, hike, all of that stuff, right?
Right.
So it was cool to go up there and do that. I worked on the e-com side and the digital and led teams there and worked with the brand stuff.
Yeah.
Made impacts wherever I kind of went, right? So like at Disney, it was like the projects were billions of dollars of investments that were translating to platforms that were billions of dollars, right? And then at REI, it was like, how do I move the needle?
Yeah.
Okay, so Disney was huge compared to REI. So
Yeah.
a lot of impact, but the percentage of moving the needle was still important.
Right.
And then, you know, inside of all of that, like I had my own projects, things going, artwork, design, making music, right?
While you were at REI?
Yeah, and Disney. Like I've always
Yeah.
had side stuff going on.
Right. I'm just trying to keep track of the timeline for people.
Right.
Right.
So REI was, you know, it was e-com, right?
Right.
I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole of these specifically, but
Well, yeah.
you know, but
But after REI, well, we were together at that point,
yeah,
and I got a job down here
right,
in LA,
running
the family office.
right.
So we had to move back down here.
Yep. And then down here, just working with a lot of different creative types. Like, I mean,
Well, that's when you started Neon Wilderness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When we moved back down here and you started working with like just a myriad of people, bands, celebrities, NFL, NBA players, Apple,
Yep.
Disney.
Yep. Worked on some movies.
Worked on movies.
Movie stuff. Even the thing I was
Universal.
going to say, like the strategy process, right? Like not just for business, but we did that thing where we worked through this to build a strategy and a brand and an ecosystem around an idea of a story to help Black men in America, right? And mental health.
Yeah.
Worked on it, and then you took it to
Will Smith's
Will
production
Smith's
company.
production company, and they greenlit it, right?
They did,
and they
based
were
on the design work and the audiences that you built out, and we had a whole deck and a whole ecosystem of how we were going to make that TV show into like you know, a book deal, a podcast, like, you know, just a bunch, like a multi-channel universe. And your design work helped us get that green light.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, like the design it's like the thinking about where do we apply the experiences for the audience, right? Not just the design of the aesthetic and all of that, but it's the touch points, right?
Right.
Right.
So you've been working, you know, with, you know, CEOs, investors, business leaders for a few years now under Neon Wilderness, and I just think I've seen enough. You've brought about enough success for myself and also, you know, other people that you work with, that I think that talking about your process is really important. I mean, I run into people all the time who just have this misconception of like what design is. They get very tactical. Like, I need a logo, I need a website. I need a logo, I need a website, you know?
Right.
And
can I say something about that?
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, design development creatives in that scenario, like designers, when things are successful, they rarely get the credit. And when things don't work, like they take all of the blame, right? Same with development, right? In projects and building things, it's right. Like it's leadership not understanding design.
Yeah.
I've worked in situations where it's a mystery to them. They think it's like throwing money to get marketing. Like, we don't know what you guys do. And I would say that has been a challenge of design. And I think that the leaders who've been around at that older generations have not done a very good job of separating design from art, right? Design from marketing. I think a lot of marketing people believe that design is informed by their marketing efforts. But I would say that the design thinking and brand strategy should inform the marketing approach to the audience. And I could really dive into that.
I think we could do a whole episode on marketing and metrics, and like that metrics led design does not lead to like a great result. It really has to resonate from leadership, and then the metrics will follow. I think there's probably multiple case studies, but something I want to say from like a business perspective is like, I think we're getting to a point where I don't think that business leadership can get away with not understanding or at least appreciating design especially in the way that you think about it. Because there's too much noise out there. And I think that's why I'm excited for you to talk about it in future episodes.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of really successful companies out there now who have people with design backgrounds that are leading it, right?
Yeah.
Airbnb is a really good example. So they're applying this design thinking, and people kind of look at the way the app works or how it looks, and they think that that's the design, but it's not, right? And business people, I think people know the value of the end result of the design, but the end result of that design is informed by the scaffolding steps to get to that place. Like Apple isn't successful because they had, beautiful minimalist white design and the Apple logo. Like there was a lot of things, there's a foundation there that informs that stuff. So, the great thing about Neon Wilderness and what I've been doing now is all of that work across corporate America, startups, punk rock, record labels, creative, photography, film, like all of those things I've done, I feel like it's helped me to understand that it's a tactical thing, but along the way, like really caring about the business, like I've really partnered with people on the business side, and I always ask questions and push, like I push on stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so along the way, it's like, well, outside of all of that, I run my own business. I've always ran my own business, and I've had to care about that. And so I care about the businesses of these other things that I've worked on.
Right.
So for me to basically leapfrog middle management, right, and work directly with leaders is, I think, the seat at the table for design at that high level is really, it's less about what's the end product and more about the thinking in which we can set ourselves up for the best success.
Yeah.
And part of that is the brand approach, the storytelling, the business, the audience, and then breaking down like all of the array of design thinking tools that can be used those tools could help business and executives at such a massive level. And I've seen it, right? Like I've applied that with people in the work that I do. And like you said, like it's like design therapy, and the aha moment goes off. And it's like a lot of the stuff I do is behind the scenes. It's not seen, but it's setting them up for success. And that makes me super proud. I mean, I've had work that I've done for Apple. I'm driving down, I don't know, Fairfax or Sunset or Vine. And it's like, oh, there's the billboard that I designed for the new iPhone X, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm more proud when a business owner emails me and tells me these things versus like all the stuff that's exterior.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's just a lot about the idea of design, I think, is misunderstood.
Yeah.
I also don't think it's been championed enough. Not in the right ways, but it's been misconstrued a bit.
Yeah. I think that's great. What you're talking about. And I think that, like, in a world where it feels like everybody has a podcast now and they sing their own praises, I think it's important to point out that, like, you have so many testimonials on your website from people that you've worked with that just sing your praises of this process.
Yeah, and it's like there's a lot of projects, scenarios, and situations that I'd love to touch on based on what I'm saying. Kind of probably have to be a little careful about that and think through just, confidentiality and all of that. But, it's really the work that goes unseen, I think, is like a lot of stuff that I'm most proud of.
Yeah.
And, it's a joy to take people through this process where it feels messy and scary and confusing. And at the end of it, it's like I have helped set them and their company up for success, a long-term success.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're doing this because I think the last thing you want to do is promote yourself. And I appreciate you letting me push you into doing something like this. It makes me think of, like, I don't know, you're just such a deep thinker. And when we go to parties, I talk to a lot of people, and you tuck in and you talk to like one person the whole night. You get really focused on people and you care about people, and your process is just so deep and cathartic. And, I think you should share more of your thoughts with people. So thanks for doing it.
Yeah. I like to go down, try to get to the bedrock, right?
Right.
And I think it's because, like, I feel like I'm doing that for myself continuously. Mm-hmm. And because I've done that for myself, I've been able to, like, do pretty well at opportunities in life. And I've messed up a lot and learned a lot, but I want to try to help other people, have success. And so I like to go deep with people, and it kind of gives an opportunity when I work with people in this way. Like, we get really honest with each other about stuff.
Yeah.
And there's musicians that I've worked with that are like, of the 25 years we've been doing this, more about us than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And it's not really like my process is set in stone and I know the right way to do everything. It's constant exploration, curiosity, and revising it. Mm-hmm. But it's also like, I know that we have to go down to the bedrock to find the truth before we can move up to the expression.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing I've helped business leaders understand. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So happy to, it's like, and it's hard to have these conversations with people over a dinner.
Yeah.
Or, at a gathering, because, like, look, it's taken this long to kind of ramp into, it's in the town of what do you do is the question at hand. Like, I tell everyone I work in digital design, right? I've worked for X, Y, and Z companies, but, like,
yeah. I feel like you take it really seriously. Funny story, the person that you talked to this week, the business owner, they also have a show on Netflix. And I really wanted to watch some episodes with you of this person on Netflix. And you were like, no. And I feel like you said no because you want to hear from this person in your sessions about how they see themselves and their business rather than passively watching them on a Netflix show that's been edited by other people and that presentation of them.
Right.
And you're very considerate about like what you will let in to your process and what you won't. And I just thought that was really considerate.
Yep.
So.
And I try to be very intentional about that stuff.
Right.
Everything's intentional.
Yep.
But it's really about, I'm trying to extract and reflect who they are and like guide them to a path of truth.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
I guess that's,
episode 1 down.
yeah.
Thanks for listening. You can check out jordanwlee.com for more information and additional podcast episodes. Feel free to contact me via email at jordan@jordanwlee.com.